B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Moed Katan Daf Tes. We're going to start from the next Mishnah in the middle of Daf Ches Amud Beis. Says the next Mishnah, Ein noisin noshim b'moed. One does not get married on Yom Tov on Chol HaMoed. Loi b'sulois v'loi almonis. Also not girls who have never been married before, and even widows who have been married before. One's not allowed to marry them on Yom Tov or Chol HaMoed. V'lo miyabmin, nor does one do yibum. Yibum we're going to learn more about in Masechet Moed, but the concept of yibum is if somebody dies without any children, his wife should marry the deceased brother, and that's called yibum, and one doesn't do that either b'moed. Mipnei shesimcha hiloi, and the reason for all these is because getting married is a simcha, is happiness and joy, and on Yom Tov one is supposed to primarily be engaged in the simcha of Yom Tov. Aval marzir hu gerushosoi, there's a mitzvah that if somebody does unfortunately get divorced, then there is a mitzvah to remarry his divorced wife, obviously assuming that she hasn't married anyone else in between. Then but that, since that is not so much simcha, therefore one's allowed to do that b'moed. V'oisa isha tachshiteh, another halacha, a woman is allowed to adorn herself. She's allowed to engage in adornments b'moed on moed, on Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo tosud, she's not allowed to smear herself with lime, mipnei sher nivul hula. It's revolting, it's uncomfortable, it's, at least whilst the lime is on, it's not a comfortable experience, and therefore one should not do this on Chol HaMoed, and because it's mitzair, it causes her some level of pain. Another halacha, hahedyot toifer kedarkoi, somebody who's not a very professional seamstress or sewer, doesn't know how to sew, is allowed to sew on Chol HaMoed. If he needs to, he can do so in his regular way, because his regular way is not very professional. Ha'uman, however, a skilled person, machliv, he should sew with irregular stitches. Umasargan is amitois, one's allowed to weave the beds. Typically they would, whatever they would sleep on, what we would call today a mattress, would be sitting on ropes that were woven together. One's allowed to tighten and weave these ropes on Yom Tov, on Moed, on Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yosi Omer Mematchin, Rabbi Yosi says you're not allowed to weave those ropes, but you're just allowed to tighten those ropes. Says the Gemara, V'chisimchi loi, my hava. You just said at the beginning of the Mishnah that you're not allowed to get married on Yom Tov, on Chol HaMoed, because it's a simcha for him. So what? You're not allowed to be b'simcha on Yom Tov? Answers the Gemara, Omer Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, v'chein Omer Rabbi Elazar, Omer Rabbi Ishia, v'omri lo Omer Rabbi Elazar, Omer Rabbi Chanina. It's not clear who said this, whether it was Shmuel, Rabbi Ishia, or Rabbi Chanina. Lefi she'ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. Of course you have to be happy on Yom Tov, but we're not allowed to blend, merge, mix together two simchas on Yom Tov. And that's why you're not allowed to get married on Yom Tov. The simcha of Yom Tov has to be exclusive to Yom Tov. Rabbi Bar Avuna Omar, a second explanation, because the problem is not that he's going to have two reasons for joy. The problem is he's going to leave the joy of Yom Tov and focus exclusively on the joy of being married on the simcha with his wife, and that is an issue because you have to be happy for Yom Tov. Omale Abayla Rav Yosef. Ha the Rabbi Bar Avuna, the Ravu. This that Rabbi Bar Avuna just said, that the issue is that you're going to leave the simcha of Yom Tov and be engaged primarily in the simcha of his wife, is actually something that was said by Rav. The Omer of Daniel Bar Katina Omer Rav, it says in the name of Rav, Minayin she'ein noisim noshim b'moed. What would be the source that you're not allowed to get married on Yom Tov? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, v'samachta b'chagecha, that you have to be happy and joyful on Yom Tov with the Yom Tov b'chagecha v'loi b'ishtecha, and not with your wife. And it was Rabbi Bar Avuna that says that if a person is going to get married, he's going to be joyful exclusively with his wife and not Yom Tov, and that will infringe on v'samachta b'chagecha. So what Rabbi Bar Avuna said was actually said by Rav. Ula Omar, Ula says a third explanation why one's not allowed to get married on Yom Tov, because he has to exert tremendous effort in preparing for the chasna, and you're not allowed to exert effort on Chol HaMoed, and therefore you're not allowed to get married on Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yitzchok Nafcha Omar mipnei bittul pirav rivya. If people are going to know that they can get married over Yom Tov, over Chol HaMoed, then he's going to say, why should I invest in the su'udos of getting married and in su'udos of Yom Tov, because on Yom Tov there's a mitzvah to have su'udos. I might as well get married on Yom Tov, and as they would say in English, I'll kill two birds with one stone. I'll have one su'udah for both getting married and for Yom Tov, and then people will delay getting married and keep it doing the mitzvah of Piriv Arivya, of having children. In order that people shouldn't delay it, the Chachomim, the Mishnah says, you can't get married on Yom Tov, and that way, as soon as a person's ready to get married, he'll get married. Asks the Gemara, Meisvei, Kol Eilu She'omru Asurin Lisa B'Moed, all those that we said, that we just said in the Mishnah, that you're not allowed to get married on Yom Tov. However, Mutorin Lisa, Erev Regel, they can get married on the day before Yom Tov. Erev Yom Tov, they can get married. When will the week of Sheva Brachos be? What we call Sheva Brachos, but the 7 days of being B'Simcha with his wife, when is that going to be? Through Yom Tov. Kashi Lekulu, it's a question on all the 4 reasons that we had, that he's going to get married the day before Yom Tov, but the Sheva Brachos week is going to be on Yom Tov, and then there's going to be an issue of the same issues that we would have had with getting married on Yom Tov, we would have with having a week of Simcha post getting married on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Loi Kashi, it's not a question. Leman de Omar Mishum Simcha, the reason that those who hold, which is actually the first 2 explanations, Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, and Maniach Simcha Soregel V'Oisik B'Simcha S'ishtoi, if it's because of Simcha, Ika Simcha Chad Yemahu, the main Simcha of getting married is just that first day. And if that first day is before Yom Tov, there's no issue with having a secondary type of Simcha of the Sheva Brachos over Yom Tov. Leman Da'ama Mishum Tircha. The third explanation, what Ula said, is because it's a very lot of effort getting married. Tircha, Ika Tircha Chad Yemahu. The main effort is only for that first day when they get married. The week of Sheva Brachos doesn't involve so much effort, and therefore it wouldn't be an issue. Leman Da'ama Mishum Bittul Piriv Arivya. The opinion that says that you don't get married on Yom Tov because people will push off the chasna till Yom Tov, then also there's no issue, because now that we know that you can't get married on Yom Tov, you can only get married the day before Yom Tov, then nobody's going to push off a chasna all the way till Yom Tov in order to be able to get married on that day before Yom Tov. Possibly he'll gain the sudos of the Sheva Brachos that he might want to gain, but if he knows he cannot get married once Yom Tov has started, nobody's going to push off a chasna just because for that one day, because something might happen, and anything could happen in the last minute, and he won't be able to get married on that Erev Yom Tov, and then he won't have gained anything to push it off, because he can't get married over Yom Tov, and therefore we're not concerned that person would push it off, and therefore if a person chose to get married on the day before Yom Tov, we don't have an issue with that. Continues the Gemara. What would be a source? Where would we find in Psukim that they didn't mix 2 simchas? Because the first explanation we said was Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. We don't want to mix the Simcha of Yom Tov with the Simcha of getting married. Where do we find that there was an issue of mixing 2 simchas? It says in a pasuk in Melachim, and this was when Shlomo HaMelech finished building the Beis HaMikdash, and they were going to make 7 days of a Yom Tov in an inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash. And it says in the pasuk, Vayas Shlomo ba'esahi es hechog v'chol Yisrael imoi kohol godel mi levoi chamos ad nachal Mitzrayim, from levoi chamos till nachal Mitzrayim, they all joined in this big Yom Tov lifnei Hashem Elokeinu, shivas yomim, 7 days. V'shivas yomim, and another 7 days. In total, arba osor yom. And that was that the 7 days before Sukkot was the week of Yom Tov for the Chanukas Beis HaMikdash. So immediately following that was the 7 days of Sukkot. In total, they had 14 days of Yom Tov. Ve'im Isa, if it would be true, the Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, that there's no problem with mixing 2 simchas together, minter, then Shlomo HaMelech should have waited an extra week ad hachag until the onset of Sukkot, and then he would have had the single week of Yom Tov over Sukkot that would have also been the Yom Tov of the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash. Why did he do it separately? The fact he did it separately must be because you're not allowed to do them together. So we have a source that we don't mix two simchas together. And Tosfos says the reason that he should have waited till Sukkot is the benefit. Would it have been allowed to have the two simchas together? Would be that people wouldn't not be able to work for 14 days. They would only not be able to work for the 7 days of Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, don't bring proof from the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash of Shlomo Melech that you're not allowed to get married on Yom Tov. But Dilma, it could be mintar loy notrinon, that Shlomo Melech, he was finished building the Beis Hamikdash a week earlier, and you're not allowed to push off a reason for simcha in order to for any other benefit. You have a reason to have a simcha now, do it now. So maybe also with getting married, don't push it off till Yom Tov. But in the event that they would be ready to get married and it just happens to be that it's Yom Tov, of Dinon you're allowed to. And maybe Shlomo HaMelech, had he finished building the Beis Hamikdash just before Sukkot, the day before Sukkot, he would have made the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot. Says the Gemara, no. He should have actually left something. If it would be mutter to have the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot, then because the benefit of having a 1 week Yom Tov and not a 2 week Yom Tov when people can't work for so long, Shlomo Melech should have left a little bit of the final building of the Beis Hamikdash for just before Yom Tov, and then arranged to finish the Beis Hamikdash just before Yom Tov. He should have been the Shiurei Purta to leave over a little bit of building for then, and then he would have had the two simchas together. From the fact that he didn't do that, you see that Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. Says the Gemara, no. Maybe Shiurei Binyan Beis Hamikdash Lo Meshayrinon. Maybe that there's an issue with intentionally leaving over part of the building of the Beis Hamikdash in order to be able to have the simcha of the Yom Tov together with the Yom Tov of Sukkot. But then you wouldn't have proof that you're not allowed to push off a chasna till Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Iboyle l'shiurei ba'amo kalyo oirev. In the Beis Hamikdash, there was something which was not really an integral part of the Beis Hamikdash. It was something on the roof that they would have a crow chaser, something that the crows shouldn't come and rest and either dirty or bring tumah onto the Beis Hamikdash, and that Amma, there wouldn't have been an issue with finishing that off and delaying that for a week. So they could have finished the Beis Hamikdash as they were working. You don't push that off, as we just said. But that little Amma Kalya Oirev, just finishing on the roof, the crow chasers, that they should have waited and pushed off if it would have been mutter to have the two simchas together. From the fact that he didn't push it off, you see that Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. Says the Gemara, that's also no proof. Amma Kalya Oirev, this Amma, which is of the crow chasers, Tzeirich Binyan Habayasu, it's still part of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore we shouldn't delay that either. So maybe Shlomo HaMelech, he just happened to finish the week before Sukkot, so he had to make the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash a week before Sukkot. But had they finished just before Sukkot, then they would have done the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot. You don't have a proof that Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. Says the Gemara, you're right, Elo, the proof that Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha is Midamiyatir Kra. I've got an extra few words in the Pasuk to teach that to us. Mechtek Siv, if it says in the Pasuk that we just mentioned before, Arba Osoyim, the last 3 words of the Pasuk is that they had a Yom Tov 14 days. Shivas Yomim v'Shivas Yomim Lomoli. Why did the Pasuk just before that have to say Shivas Yomim v'Shivas Yomim, 7 days and 7 days? Just say 14 days. Shma Minot. So what we see from here is that the Pasuk is trying to impress on us Hani Lechud v'Hani Lechud. The 7 days that you wanted or that you needed for the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash and the 7 days of Sukkot have to be separate. Ein Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha. Continues the Gemara, Omer of Paranoch, Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said regarding that year when they finished the Beis Hamikdash, and we all know that Yom Kippur is on the 10th of Tishri. Sukkot is on the 15th. The 7 days before Sukkot started 2 days before Yom Kippur, the third day being on Yom Kippur. So it says Rabbi Yochanan, Oisa Shana, that year, they didn't make a Yom Kippur, they didn't fast, it was festivities. They were eating, they were drinking, they were bringing their korbanos, they were just feasting with the Chanukas Beis HaMikdash. And they were very concerned. And they said, Shema, maybe nischayvu soineim shel Yisrael. Maybe the soineim shel Yisrael, the literal translation is the enemies of Klal Yisrael. But it's just a way of speaking about Klal Yisrael when it's not so good. Maybe Klal Yisrael are deserving kloya of being destroyed. Yotza Baskel, V'omra Baskel came out and said, V'omra lahem, kulchem, all of you, muzumonim l'chaye ha'olam haba. You all have a share and you're ready for olam haba. None of you are going to be punished for having eaten and drunk on Yom Kippur. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Asks the Gemara, my Dorosh, what was their source? What gave them sort of permission to be able to, so to speak, override Yom Kippur for the Chanukas Beis HaMikdash? Omru, they said Kal V'chomer. They made a Kal V'chomer. Uma Mishkan. With the inauguration of the Mishkan, all those years earlier, the Mishkan itself didn't have an eternal kedusha, which means all the while that the Mishkan was built, one was not allowed to offer korbanos on the boma. Once the Mishkan was destroyed, when it was destroyed, they were allowed to again offer korbanos on the boma. However, the Beis HaMikdash, in contrast to that, once there was a Beis HaMikdash, bomos are always going to be aser, and we're going to learn more about this at the end of Maseches Zvachim. But if the Mishkan, which is a lesser degree of Kedusha than the Beis HaMikdash, and the Korban Yochid, and the Korbanos of the Nesiim that were brought for the Chanukas HaMishkan at the beginning when they first inaugurated the Mishkan, Doiche Shabbos, it overrode Shabbos, De'isa Skila, which is, Shabbos is very severe. Shabbos is the activities doing a malacha on Shabbos are punishable by Skila. If we would override the Skila of Shabbos in order to bring a Korban Yochid, the Nesiim brought a Korban Yochid for the Chanukas HaMishkan, which is a lesser degree of Kedusha, then Mikdash, when it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, the Kedusha also Kedushas Olam, the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash is eternal. The Korban Tzibur, and the Korbanos of the Beis HaMikdash, unlike the Korbanos of the Nesiim, by the Chanukas HaMishkan, the Chanukas HaBayis, by the Beis HaMikdash were actually public Korbanos, there's more reason, there's a higher level of those Korbanos. V'yoyim HaKippurim de'enish koros, and the severity of breaking Yom Kippur is less than that of Shabbos, it's only koros. Like Kolshkin, of course, you can break Yom Kippur for the Chanukas Beis HaMikdash. So we'll soon see that the Gemara is going to ask that if you have a Kal V'chomer to break the Yom Kippur, so to speak, to override Yom Kippur for the Korbanos, but why did you have to eat and drink then? We'll soon get to that. But in the meantime, the Gemara is asking, Ela amai hoyu doyagim. If you have a Kal V'chomer, why were they concerned that they were going to be deserving of being destroyed for not keeping Yom Kippur? Says the Gemara, because Hasam Tzeirach Gavoya. Because overriding Shabbos by the Chanukas HaMishkan was bringing Korbanos. And ultimately, Korbanos is something, so to speak, for Hashem. Hoch over here, but the breaking of Yom Kippur that they did during the Chanukas Beis HaMikdash, where they would eat and drink, the eating and drinking is Chanukas, is Tzerech Hedyot. It was for private, it was for the people themselves. It wasn't a korban that was put onto the Mizbeach for Hashem. Asks the Gemara, Hochanami. If so, maybe here on Yom Kippur also, me'eved li'evdu, they should have brought the korbanos, meichel loy neichel v'loy nishtu, but they shouldn't have eaten and shouldn't have drunk. Says the Gemara, no. Ein simcha b'lo achila v'shtia. Since they needed to be b'simcha, to be happy and joyous, there's no simcha without eating and drinking. And therefore they ate and drank, but they were concerned, because they didn't really have the Kal V'chomer onto the same level as, certainly not on the same level as the Chanukas HaMishkan, and therefore they were concerned, and the Baskel said it's okay, and you're all muzumonim l'chaya olam haba. Says the Gemara, Mishkan, this whole Kal V'chomer was built on the assumption that the Korbanos Yochid of the Nesiim in the Chanukas HaMishkan overrode Shabbos. Mishkan dedachi Shabbos minalon, what would be your source for that? Are you going to suggest it's from what it says in the Pasuk by the Chanukas HaMishkan? Vayihi hamakriv b'yoyim harishon es korbonoi nachshin ben aminadov. Lemate Yehuda. That's what it says in one pasuk, that the one who brought the korbanos on the first day of the Chanukas HaMishkan was Nachshon ben Aminadab. And then it says, some psukim later, Bayoim HaShvi, on the seventh day, Nosi livnei Ephraim Elishama ben Amiud. So you see that they brought on the first day, they brought on the seventh day. We assume the seventh day was Shabbos, so they brought korbanos on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, that wouldn't be a proof. Dilma Shvi le korbanos. Maybe it just means the seventh, in the order, the seventh day where korbanos were brought was this Nosi livnei Ephraim Elishama ben Amiud. But maybe the sixth day was on a Friday and the seventh day was on a Sunday. Who told you they brought on Shabbos? Omer of Nachman bar Yitzchok Omar Kra. It says in the pasuk, much further on in that parasha, Bayoim ashtei asar yoim. On the day of the 11th day, Nosi livnei Osher Pagiel ben Ochron. The question is, why does it say twice day? Ubayoim ashtei asar yoim. On the day of the 11th day. So there's something about this day which we learn out from the concept called day. Ma yoim, the concept of day. Kulei rotzuf. A day in and of its own is consecutive. It's 1 hour after the next. 24 hours makes a day. Af ashtei asar. So too the 11 days that are mentioned here, kulon rotzufim, they were all consecutive. And they didn't skip over Shabbos. So you see from here that they would bring the korbanos even on Shabbos. Asks the Gemara, maybe v'dilma yomim haru'im. Maybe all it means is that the days were indeed consecutive, but it's the consecutive days that are able to bring these korbanos, but not including Shabbos. So 6 days of 1 week and then 6 days of the next week. There you have 11 consecutive days that you could bring korbanos. So you don't have proof that it would override Shabbos. So he says, Ksiv kra china. Let's go to there's another pasuk. The pasuk says, a few psukim later, B'yoim shneim asar yoim, on the 12th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. Again, B'yoim, on the day of the shneim asar yoim, of the 12th day. Nosi livnei Naftali achira ben Einon. Again, you have twice the word yoim. Ma yoim, in the same way as the concept of day is kulei rotzov, it's consecutive. Af shneim asar yoim, so too the 12 days, kulam ritzufim, they are all consecutive. But again, asks the Gemara, Dilma Hochanami, maybe here also, Yomim Haru'uyim is talking about 12 consecutive days, but types of days that are fit to bring korbanos, excluding Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Im Kain Trei Kroi Lomoli. Why do I need two psukim? Also on the 11th day, also in the 12th day, it says an extra word, Yom. It says the Gemara to teach us that they have to be consecutive, but not just consecutive days on days which are fit for korbanos, excluding Shabbos. No. Really consecutive days, including Shabbos. So you see that Shabbos was overwritten for those korbanos. And now the Gemara is saying, on Mikdash the Doicha Yom HaKippurim Minolon, and the Rishonim here discuss that we already have a Kal V'chomer. But it seems that besides the Kal V'chomer, we want a pasuk to say that one was allowed to override Yom Kippur. Ilei Memidachsiv Arba Asar Yom. Are you going to say from the fact that it says in the pasuk, the first pasuk we mentioned by Shlomo, where it says Arba Asar Yom, that there was 14 days, that consecutive days of Simcha, 7 days and 7 days, one after the next. So it wouldn't be the 7 days of the Chanukas Beis HaMikdash wouldn't mean having skipped Yom Kippur, like we saw before. That's what the Yom does. Dilma Yomim Aru'im. Maybe the word Yom, Arba Asar Yom, is just telling us 14 days that are fit to have a Chanukas Beis HaMikdash. Yom Kippur is clearly not fit to have a Chanukas Beis HaMikdash, so maybe we'd skip that day and it wouldn't be a contradiction to 14 days. Says the Gemara, you're right. But Gomar Yom Yom Mehasam. We have a Gzera Shava. It says Yom He Arba Asar Yom, and it says Yom by the Mishkan, as we just saw before. And B'yoim Shneim Asar Yom. We compare Chanukas Beis HaMikdash to Chanukas HaMishkan. In the same way as Chanukas HaMishkan overrode Shabbos, so too Chanukas HaBayis overrides the Yom Kippur. Continues the Gemara that we saw before that when Rabbi Yochanan said that year Klal Yisrael were concerned, maybe they would be destroyed because they didn't keep Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Yotza Baskel v'Armolhem, a heavenly voice cried out and said, Kulchem uzumonim lo'olam haba, you're all fit for olam haba. Where indeed, what would be a scriptural source, a posuk, that Hashem forgave them for not keeping Yom Kippur? And the Mefarshim ask that the word da'ochil means to forgive. It would seem that it's an avera. We've just brought a source that it was actually okay that they broke Yom Kippur. So that's something discussed by the Mefarshim. But we're going to find a source. Says the Gemara, Detoni Tachlifa. Learned in a Braisa. The Braisa is based on a posuk. The posuk says, Bayoim, and this is again going back to the 14 days, first 7 days of the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash, and then 7 days of Sukkot. Bayoim Ashmini, on the 8th day of Sukkot, Shilach es ha'om, then the people who were there for those 14 days were dismissed. Vayivorchu es hamelech, they blessed the melech, Shlomo HaMelech, vayilchu le'oleihem, and they went to their tents, smeichim, happy, v'tuvei leiv, and feeling good in their hearts, al kol ha'toiva she'asa Hashem leDavid avdoi, for all the good that Hashem did for his servant David HaMelech, u'Yisrael Amoy, and for Klal Yisrael, his people. And now the Gemara is going to go through this. Bryce is going to go through each word in this pasuk. La'oleim. It says that vayilchu la'oleim, they went back to their tents, to their homes. What does that mean? Sheholchu u'motzu nesheim betara. They went back to their homes and they found that their wives were toher, they could have relations with their wife, and that was a reason for happiness. Smeichim, they were happy. What's this word teaching us? Shenenu miziva shchina. They were happy that they managed to take pleasure and benefit from the Shechina. V'tuvei leiv, what is that telling us? Shekol echod ve'echod nis'abro ishtoi beben zochor. Because every single one of them, their wives conceived a boy, and that was very much gave them a toiv leiv, a good heart. Al kol ha'toiva, on all the goodness. What is that? What was that teaching us? Sheyotza baskel v'omro lehem, the baskel that went out and said, Kulchem zumonim l'chaya elam haba. And this is like Rabbi Yochanan said before, that there was a baskel that said that they were all fit for Olam Haba. That's what's alluded to in the pasuk, Al Kol HaToiva. What does it mean, LeDavid Avdoi, for all the good Hashem did, LeDavid Avdoi, to his servant David, Ule Yisrael Amoy, and to Klal Yisrael. So Bishleim Ule Yisrael Amoy, we can understand what good Hashem did for Klal Yisrael, Ta'ochilu Avoinu Yom Kippurim. He forgave them for having eaten and drunk on Yom Kippur. Elo leDavid Avdoi Maihi. Where does David HaMelech come into this? David HaMelech wasn't even alive anymore. Shlomo only started building the Beis HaMikdash after David HaMelech passed away. So this was long after David HaMelech passed away. Where does he come into the picture? Omer of Yehuda Marav. B'shor shebikei Shlomo lahachnis orin lemikdash. They'd built the Beis HaMikdash, and now it was time to bring the Oroin into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Dov kusha Orim zeh b'zeh, but the gates clung to each other. He couldn't open the gates, he couldn't get the Oroin in. Omar Shlomo, so Shlomo HaMelech said, Esrim v'arba rononis. He said 24 different terms of davening. If you look in the parasha there, in the psukim, it uses the terms of Rino and Tchino and Tfilo and Bakosha, 24 tfilos. And yet he wasn't answered. Posach v'omar, Shlomo HaMelech, he started saying the psukim in Tehillim Perek Chov Dalet, Su'u sha'orim rosheichem, lift up gates, lift up your heads, v'hinos'u pischei oilam v'yovei melech ha'kovod. V'lo he still wasn't answered. Kivan she'omar, since he said a posuk in Divrei Yomim, Hashem Elokim, al tosheiv pnei meshichecha, zochro lechazdei David avdecha, which means he shouldn't ignore, you should recognize your anointed one and remember the pieties of your servant David HaMelech. Miyad nene. As Shlomo HaMelech mentioned his father David, immediately he was answered, and the doors of the Beis HaMikdash opened up to allow him to bring the Oroin in. At that point, everybody realized that the Beis HaMikdash was being inaugurated here in the merit of David HaMelech. So at that point, Nefchu pnei soinei David, the faces of David HaMelech's enemies became darkened, keshulei kedera, like the bottom of a pot. V'yodu HaKol, and everybody knew shemochal lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Hashem had forgiven David HaMelech al oisei ovoin for the incident he had with Bathsheba, discussed at length in the Novi. But there was some incident that the enemies of David used against him all the time. And here it was clear, Hashem said, I've forgiven David, I hold nothing against David HaMelech. And you can see the doors of the Beis HaMikdash opened in the merit of David. And that's what the pasuk says, Al kol ha'toiva she'osa Hashem leDavid avdoi u'liYisrael amoy. Continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yonason ben Asmai v'Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim, two chachomim, tonu, they were learning Parashas Nedorim, the Parasha Psukim and the Masechta, the Mishnayos and the Gemara of Maseches Nedorim. By Reb Shimon bar Yochai, by their Rebbe, Reb Shimon bar Yochai. They wanted to travel on their ways. Iftar minei be'urtas, in the evening before they wanted to travel, they went to Reb Shimon to take leave of him. Letzafra, in the morning, hadar v'kom iftar minei. Again they came to Reb Shimon bar Yochai, again to take leave from him. Omar Luhu, Reb Shimon bar Yochai said to Rabbi Yonason and to Rabbi Yehuda, V'lav iftarisu minim be'urta, did you not take leave of me already last night? Omar, they said to him, L'madutenu Rabbeinu, did you, our Rebbe, Reb Shimon bar Yochai, not teach us that Talmid sheniftar me Rabbi, that a Talmid who takes leave of his Rebbe, but it doesn't actually leave the city that day. V'lon ba'isa'ir, he sleeps in the city that night. Tzarich liftar mimenu pam acheres. Then the next day before taking leave, again you have to go to your Rebbe and take leave of him. Where do we learn that from? Shenemar, as it says in the same pasuk that we mentioned before. By Yom Hashmini, on the 8th day of Sukkot, Shilach esa'om, that the people, they were dismissed, Vayvorachu es HaMelech, and they blessed the Melech Shlomo. That was on the 8th day of Sukkot. The 8th day of Sukkot was the 22nd day of Tishri. Uchsiv, it says in another pasuk, a pasuk in Divrei Yomim, Uboyoim esrim u'shloisha lachodesh. That means in Melachim it says that they took leave on the 22nd day of Tishri. And in Divrei Yomim it says that they took leave of Shlomo HaMelech on the 23rd day, L'chodesh HaShvi of Tishri, Shilach esa'om lo'holeim, smeichim v'tuvei leiv ala toiva she'asa Hashem leDavid u'leShlomo u'leYisrael amoy. So you see that they took leave on the 23rd day, which was the day later. Why did they take leave of him twice? Elo mikan, from here we learn the Talmid sheniftar mi Rabbi, that when somebody is about to take leave of their Rebbe, but v'lon ba'isa'ir, but the people who they took leave of Shlomo HaMelech on the last day of Sukkot, but they stayed overnight till the next day, what we call Isra Chag, the 23rd day of Tishri, they were stayed overnight. Tzarich liftar mimenu pam acheres. You have to come again to take leave. So this is what the students of Reb Shimon bar Yochai told Reb Shimon. Omar le'lebrei, Reb Shimon bar Yochai now said to his son, Pnei odem alolu, these people, anoshim shel tzura, they are people of stature, they are chachomim, talmidei chachomim. Heim, they are zil gaber, and go to them, deliverchuch, that they should give you a bracha. It's worth getting a bracha from talmidei chachomim. Ozal, so Reb Shimon bar Yochai went, the son went, Ashkechinu de karomu kroya adodi. When he found them, these two chachomim, Rabbi Yonason and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim, he found them engaged in Torah learning. What were they discussing? They seemed to be the karomu kroya adodi. They were asking an apparent, a seeming contradiction between two psukim. Ksiv, says in one pasuk, Paleis ma'agal raglecha, you should weigh the course of your feet. V'chol dorochecha, yikoinu, and all your ways should be established. Which means that when you have two mitzvahs to do, weigh it up. Do the bigger mitzvah. Leave the other mitzvah. Uchsiv, however, in contrast, a different pasuk, it says in Mishli, Oirach chaim pentefales, your path of life, lest you weigh. No umagloiseo loiseido. So here it seems that there shouldn't be tefales. You shouldn't be weighing up your ways. A mitzvah that comes your way, do the mitzvah straight away. It doesn't matter if it's a bigger mitzvah, a smaller mitzvah, you do that mitzvah. There seems to be a contradiction. Is it oirach chaim pentefales, or is it pales magal raglecha? Says that's the question they asked. Lo kasha. They said it's not a contradiction. Kan b'mitzvah she'efshel asayis halidei achirim. If others will do the smaller mitzvah, you engage in the bigger mitzvah. Weigh up which is the bigger mitzvah. You do the bigger mitzvah. Kan b'mitzvah she'efshel asayis halidei achirim. However, mitzvah that's if you have two mitzvahs that neither of them are going to be done by anyone else, in that case, don't weigh it up. The first mitzvah that comes to you, you should do. Hodo Yosvi, they were still sitting, and they asked another question, another seeming contradiction. Ksiv, it says in one pasuk, regarding Torah, that Torah is Yekorohi Mipninim, it is more precious than pearls. V'chol chafotzecha, and all your own desires, lo yishu ba, don't compare to learning Torah. You should forego all your own desires in order to sit and learn Torah. Ha cheftzei shamayim, but it seems it's just chafotzecha, your desires don't compare to Torah. But cheftzei shamayim, the desires of Hashem, which is doing mitzvahs, yishu ba, they are compared to Torah, and therefore you should stop learning Torah in order to do a mitzvah. However, it says in a different pasuk in Mishli, Ki toiva chochma mipninim, wisdom is better than pearls. V'chol chafotzim, and all desires lo yishu ba, don't compare to Torah. So you see here that dafilu cheftzei shamayim lo yishu ba, that even desires of Hashem, of mitzvahs, don't compare to learning Torah. So you should never stop learning Torah to do a mitzvah. We have a seeming contradiction. When do you stop learning to do a mitzvah? So they answered, "Kan b'mitzvah she'ef she'la'aseh yis'alei acherim." If it's a mitzvah that can get done by somebody else, then you continue learning and let somebody else do the mitzvah. Kan b'mitzvah she'ef she'la'aseh yis'alei acherim. A type of mitzvah that's either won't be done by anyone, can't be done by anyone, it's incumbent upon you to do it. You have to stop learning Torah in order to do the mitzvah, and immediately when you finish the mitzvah, you come back to your Torah learning. And at this point they realized that the son of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was waiting to speak to them. Omru lei, they said to the son of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, "My boy is hocha, what are you doing here?" Omar luhu. So the son of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said to these two chachomim, "To Omar li Abba, my father Rabbi Shimon said, Zil gabayhu, I should come to you, delivarchuch, to get a bracha from you." Omru lei, so they said to him as follows, a bracha that was extremely cryptic and even sounded more like a curse than a bracha. He said like this, they said to him like this, Yehiravo should be Hashem's desire, the tizra that you should sow, v'loi tachtzad, and you should not reap. Ta'ayil you should take in, v'loi tepuk, you shouldn't bring out. Tepuk, what you take out, v'loi ta'ayil, won't bring anything in. Lichroiv beischa, your home should be destroyed. V'leisav ushpizach, and your inn should be inhabited, your temporary dwelling should be inhabited, but your home should be destroyed. Lebal bil pseirach, your table should get disrupted. And you shouldn't see a new year. The son of Reb Shimon didn't know what to do with this. When he went back to his father Reb Shimon, Omar Lei, the son of Reb Shimon, said to Reb Shimon, not only did they not give me a bracha, they caused me anguish. This is called a bracha? This is what you tell me? This sounds more like a curse than a blessing. Omar Lei, Reb Shimon told his son, what did they tell you? He said verbatim, this is what these two chachamim told me. Omar Lei, Reb Shimon, who understood the wisdom of this bracha, said to his son, Hanoch kulu birchasanenu, these are all brachas. Tizra v'lei techtzad, when he told you that you should sow and you shouldn't reap, it didn't mean that you should sow in your fields and there should be nothing to reap. That would be a curse. What he meant is, toilid bonim, you should have children, v'lo yamusu, they should never be cut down, they shouldn't die. Ta'ayil v'lo tepuk, when you were told that you should bring in, take in, and not take out, doesn't mean you should take in your produce and not take it to the marketplace and not be able to sell it. No. It means take in ta'ayil kalosu, you should take in a daughter-in-law. Typically, when a woman gets married, she moves into her husband's home. Take in a daughter-in-law, v'loile musu b'noch, and your children shouldn't die, delifkon, that this daughter-in-law will then leave. When they said to you, tepuk v'loi ta'ayil, it will go out and won't come in, it doesn't mean that you'll try and go to the marketplace and make money and no money will come in. That would be a curse. No, it means toilid b'nosa, you should have daughters, that they are going to go out, they're going to get married and move into their husbands. And their husbands shouldn't die, your sons-in-law shouldn't die, and they will come back to your home. Rabbi Shimon continued, when these chachomim told you, my son, that your home should get ruined and that you should dwell in a temporary abode in your inn, what they meant was that your grave, a grave is sometimes called a home, and that home that you have waiting for you should be in ruins. It should be a long time till you die. You shouldn't die for a very long time. And you should be living in this world, which is a temporary world, for a long time. That's what they meant. Lichrav beischa v'leisav. You should sit for many years, ushpizach, in a temporary dwelling in this world. You should have many years in this world. And this is what the Gemara is going to explain. The high alma, because this world, ushpizach, is just a temporary dwelling, like an inn. Vahi Alman, that world, is Beisa, is considered a home. That means when you leave this world, you go into a bias, into something more permanent. The Chsiv says in the Pasuk, and this is regarding Rishoim. Regarding Rishoim, the Pasuk says, Kirbom, they imagine, in their imagination, Batei Mei La'olam, they think they're going to stay in their homes forever. And really what it means is, Al Tikri Kirbom. The word Kirbom can be rearranged, the letters are rearranged, not to read Kirbom as in their imagination, Elo Kivrom, their graves, because the graves of Rishoim, that is their home eternally. For Tzadikim, Olam Haba is their eternal home. The Rishoim don't get to Olam Haba. And so the Tzadikim, their world, that means when a person passes away, he moves into a more permanent dwelling. So what these Chachomim said to the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is that your home, your graves, should be destroyed, so to speak, shouldn't be come into use for many years. And you should stay in this world. When Rabbi Shimon explained that when the Chachomim said Lebalbil Psoirach, your table should get disrupted, you know what that means? Beboni ubnasi, you should have sons and daughters, and anyone who's got little children knows what it means that the table gets disrupted. And when he said you shouldn't see a new year, he didn't say you should die that year. What they meant is tamus intoch, that your wife shouldn't die, and then you'll marry another wife, and then you have to have another Shana Rishona. So they gave you a bracha, you should only ever have one Shana Rishona in your life. You should never see another new year. Continues the Gemara. Reb Shimon ben Chalafta, iftar minei de Rav. Reb Shimon ben Chalafta took leave of Rav. Omar lei. So Rav said to his son, Zil legabe, go to Reb Shimon ben Chalafta, Dilevorchich, he should give you a bracha. Omar lei. So what did Reb Shimon Chalafta say to the son of Rav? Yehi Rav, it should be Hashem's desire, Deloit Tevayish, that you shouldn't embarrass anyone. Veloit Tizbayish, if you don't embarrass anyone, then you will not get embarrassed. Osegabe Avua, the son of Rav came to his father Rav. Omar lei, my Omar lecha. So Rav asked his son, what did Reb Shimon ben Chalafta tell you? Omar lei, the son of Rav said to Rav, Milin be'almahu. The Omar lei just said to me very basic words. He didn't give me this bracha. Omar lei. So after the son of Rav told Rav that what Reb Shimon ben Chalafta told him was, don't embarrass anyone so that you shouldn't get embarrassed, he said, Bircha said, Birchon Kutsha Brichu Yisrael. What he gave you was such a bracha. Hashem actually gave that bracha to Klal Yisrael, but not only once. V'tonaba, he repeated that bracha a second time to Klal Yisrael. The Chsiv, as it says in the pasuk, it says in the pasuk in Perek Beis of Yoel, Va'achaltem, you shall eat. Ochel v'soiva, you'll eat and be satisfied. V'ilaltem es shem Hashem Elokeichem, and you will bless, you will praise Hashem, Asher oso imochem lahafli, v'lo yevoishu ami la'olam. And you, my people, will not be embarrassed, will not be shamed ever. The next pasuk, v'yidatem ki bekerev Yisrael oni, and you'll know that I am amongst you. V'ani Hashem Elokeichem, and I am Hashem your God. V'ein oid, there's no other. V'lo yevoishu ami la'olam, and my people will not be shamed forever. So it says twice in the V'lo yevoishu ami la'olam, two psukim, one after the other. One to say that you will not embarrass anyone else, and the second one to say that will mean that you're not going to get embarrassed either. So Rav said to his son that the bracha that Reb Shimon ben Chalafta gave you is a bracha repeated in Yoel by Hashem to Klal Yisrael. Continues the Gemara. V'oise isha tachshiteh. A woman is allowed to adorn herself on Chol HaMoed. That's what we saw in the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanon, Eiluim Tachshitei Noshim. Which adornments, what is a woman allowed to do on Chol HaMoed? Keicheles, she's allowed to paint herself. Upoisekes, she's allowed to part her hair. Uma'avira Srak al Paneo, and she can apply something onto her face that will cause it to become reddened. That's what makes her happy. Ve'ikadam, others say, ma'avere srak al paneo shel mata, that she can pass over a srak onto her, it's called paneo shel mata, to remove her pubic hairs. Tebisu de Rav Chisda, the wife of Rav Chisda, mikashte b'anpa kalosa, she was already an older woman, she had daughters-in-laws, and before her daughters-in-laws, in front of them, she would adorn herself. Yosef, Rav Huna bar China, she did this on Chol HaMoed. And at that time, when Rav Chisda's wife was doing this, Rav Huna bar China was sitting, Kameda Rav Chisda, was sitting in front of Rav Chisda. Yosef was saying as follows, Lo yishonu elo yalda, when the Mishnah says that woman is allowed to adorn herself on Chol HaMoed, that's only a young child who's got these, that it's very necessary for her. For her, she needs this for her Yom Tov happiness, for Chol HaMoed happiness, for Simchas Yom Tov, to be able to adorn herself like this. Avol zakena, but an older woman like your wife who's already got daughters-in-laws, Loi, for that not, it's not a necessity. You should mature, grow up, you don't need this anymore. Omar Lei, so Rav Chisda answered back to Rav Huna and said to her, Elokim, in the name of Hashem, afilu imcha, even your mother, vafilu imcha de imcha, even your grandmother, vafilu medes al kivra, even somebody, a woman so aged that she's got what we would call one foot in the grave, even a very, very old woman, is also allowed to adorn herself, to paint herself, and to make herself look beautiful. Why? To Omri Inchi, don't forget what people say. In today's terms, we call it, every adult has an inner child. Bashitin kabashis, a 60-year-old woman is exactly like a 6-year-old girl. Lekal tavla roato, that she runs to the sound of bells. When there's a chasna and there's music and dancing, a 6-year-old will naturally run there. A 60-year-old will also run there, because every 60-year-old has a 6-year-old inside her. So also this woman, an older woman, a married woman, an aged woman, she needs what we would call these childish needs. She needs them right through her life, and therefore even an older woman is allowed to adorn herself and engage in painting herself, etc. on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lo Tosud, Rabbi Yehuda said that woman is not allowed to apply lime to herself on Chol HaMoed. And let's see now why. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Isha Lo Tosud Mipnei Shenivul Hu Lo. And we actually saw this already in the Mishnah, that whilst the lime is on the woman, then it's uncomfortable for her. It doesn't make her look good at the time. So even though after she removes it, she feels much better and she's very happy, but whilst it's on, it's a nivul for her, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says a woman should not apply lime on Chol HaMoed. Umayda Rabbi Yehuda. However, Rabbi Yehuda says that applying this lime in a way that it can be peeled off on Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to apply it on Chol HaMoed and then remove it on Chol HaMoed, even though it's a pain for her and discomfort for her whilst the lime is on her, when she removes it and it's still Chol HaMoed, she'll be happy, and that you're allowed to do. Asks the Gemara, does Rabbi Yehuda hold that doing something which causes a pain is allowed on Chol HaMoed because afterwards you'll be happy about it? Votnan, this seems to contradict the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the Mishnah says at the beginning of Masechet Avodah Zarah that you're not allowed to make a goy happy, somebody who serves Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to make them happy on their holidays. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Nifroim mehem, even though you're not allowed to pay a debt back to a goy on his holiday, but if he has to pay you, he's allowed to pay you, you're allowed to accept payment from a goy on his holiday. Mipnei shemeitzar, because it's a distress for him. Nobody likes to give out money. Nobody likes to pay back a debt. Omru loi, the Chachomim said to Rabbi Yehuda, Afal pisha meitzar achshav, sameachu la'achar zman. They argued with Rabbi Yehuda and said, no, even though whilst he's paying you back, he's in distress, but a few minutes later, a few hours later, it's still their holiday, he's then going to be happy. At least I've got the debt off my head. If he's going to be happy if you've made him happy on his holiday, you're not allowed to do that, and therefore you're not even allowed to receive a payment of a debt from a goy on their holiday. So from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says you are allowed to, it shows that Rabbi Yehuda says, since when they're actually paying their debts, they're not happy, you're allowed to take it from them, even though they're going to be happy later. So then why does Rabbi Yehuda say that you're not allowed to? A woman is not allowed to apply lime because she's going to be happy later, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't look into what's going to be later. Rabbi Yehuda only looks at what's now. Like you can receive payment of a debt from a goy, so too you should be able to apply the lime. That's the question of the Gemara. Omer of Nachman by Yitzchok. Rav Nachman by Yitzchok says that Hilchas Chol HaMoed is different. Hanach Hilchas Moed. The kulhu meitzar achshav, because all the things that are mutter to do on Chol HaMoed, it's things that are activities that whilst you're doing them, it's a certain pressure, stress, it's cooking, baking, whatever you're doing. But the reason you're allowed to do it is because you want to prepare to be able to benefit from what you're cooking and baking when you've finished the activity of cooking and baking and you have what to eat. So on Chol HaMoed, the whole concept, the whole leniencies of Chol HaMoed are based on do activities now in order to benefit later on Chol HaMoed. So too, he says that you're allowed, Rabbi Yehuda says, as long as you can remove that lime on Chol HaMoed and benefit from having put the lime on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. However, Rabbi Yehuda says when it comes to receiving a loan, to receiving the money back from a guy that he owes you, there we don't look at what's going to be later. If whilst he's giving you the money, he's in distress, he's not happy, then says Rabbi Yehuda, you're allowed to receive it from him, and you cannot compare that to the halachas of Chol HaMoed. That was one answer of the seeming contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda. Ravina Omar, Ravina says no. Kuti le'inyan piroin la'olam meitzer. A guy, he's never happy he paid the loan. He was always hoping somehow he would get out of it and be able to steal the money for himself. And since he's never going to be happy, Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to take the money from him on his holiday. Continues the Gemara. Omar of Yehuda. B'nois Yisrael she'igiu lepirkon. When B'nois Yisrael, Yiddish girls, that they came to the stage of puberty and they had pubic hairs growing, but they were not yet 12 years old, and therefore it was a little bit young to have these hairs, and they were embarrassed. They would remove these hairs. Aniyos, the poorer amongst them, what would they do? Toiflois oison basid, they would plaster themselves with lime, and after they would plaster themselves with lime, they would remove the lime, and that would remove those hairs. Ashiros, the wealthier amongst them, toiflois oison basoiles, they would plaster on themselves not with lime, but with fine flour. Benois Melochim, the daughters of royalty, b'shemen hamoir, they would use this special oils called shemen hamoir. Shenemer, it says in the pasuk, shisho chadoshim b'shemen hamoir, that they would use the shemen hamoir, and one of the uses was to remove these hairs. My shemen hamoir, what is this shemen hamoir? Asks the Gemara. It means we were in the middle of listening to Rav Yehuda. The Gemara interjects. What is this shemen hamoir that Rav Yehuda mentioned? Rav Huna bar Chia Omar, stakas. It's an oil called stakas. Yirmiyah bar Ami Omar, shemen zayis shulahevi shlish, olive oil from olives that had not ripened a third. And the Gemara brings a brayser, Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and pikinoin. What is this oil called? And pikinoin is shemen zayis shulahevi shlish, is this olive oil that hadn't, from olives that had not yet matured a third. And now we're going back to Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda just told us that the Bnei Yisrael would remove the hairs if it was higiu la pirkon v'lo higiu la shonim. Why would they anoint themselves? Shemeishir es asar. Number one, it removes the hairs that are not wanted, and also ma'adin es habasar, it refines, it causes the flesh, the skin to glow. Continues the Gemara. Rav Bivi havale brata. Rav Bivi had a daughter, and he wanted her to glow, and her skin should be smooth. Tafla aver, and he smeared her whole body, one limb at a time. And then she looked so beautiful afterwards that all the boys that wanted to marry her, they were, so to speak, who was offering the most money. Shokal Bor of Bivi received and took for his daughter Arba Mea Zuzi, 400 zuz. Havahu Kuti B'Shuvavisa. There was this guy in the neighborhood of Rav Bivi who heard that Rav Bivi's daughter became so beautiful because he had smeared her. The Havale Brata, he had a daughter. Tafla B'Chad Zimna, he just applied this whole, he smeared his daughter, her whole body in one go. Umeisa, she couldn't deal with that and she died. Omar, and this guy said, Ktila Bivi Librati. Bivi, which was referring to Rav Bivi, killed my daughter because I just copied him. What he didn't realize was that Rav Bivi knew what he was doing. He did it one limb at a time, and he didn't. Omar of Nachman, he commented and said, Rav Bivi, the Shasi Shechra, in Rav Bivi's home they would drink beer. And what drinking beer does, it makes the hairs grow and it makes the skin be not so pleasant. Boya b'nosei tofla. And therefore his daughters needed to be smeared with lime. And none says of Nachma, in our homes, we don't drink beer. Our daughters don't need to be smeared with lime in order not to have these hairs and in order for their skin to be beautiful. And in Yitzchok Hashem, in the next year, we're going to continue the next Gemara.